It's midterm election time in the United States. Millions of voters will go to the polls to decide on the makeup of the Senate and House of Representatives for the next 2 years. Historically, young voters in the U.S. have been reluctant to play a major role in voting at the midterms. But there are signs that things could be different this time. Hello, I'm Alican Ayanlar. The Square starts now. In this midterm elections, all 435 seats in the House of Representatives are up for grabs, as well as 35 seats in the Senate and 39 choices for governors. The president himself is not on the ballot, but the outcome is likely to define his remaining 2 years in office. Without a doubt, one of the most prominent demographics in this election are the youth vote. And with over 10,000 people turning 18 every day in the U.S., it's a major group that both parties will want on their side. But turnout for young people has never been high. In fact, the last time it exceeded 20% was 3 decades ago. TRT World's Nicole Johnston traveled to North Carolina to find out whether numbers could be higher this time around.
It's Friday night in Charlotte. And for Republicans, this is the big attraction. Not a concert, but US President Donald Trump.
Hello, North Carolina. Thank you very much. And I'm really glad to be back in Charlotte.
These university students have driven 2 hours for this Republican rally.
They're fun. From the one that I went to, I didn't know what I expected out of it, but it was just fun to be there. It was fun to talk with people that thought like you, that spoke like you, and it was really nice to at least say I was in the same building as the president.
They all plan to vote on Tuesday and believe the economy and job prospects have improved under the Republicans. They also like the president's style.
I do like the fact that he speaks his mind. He seems like more of a cool uncle to me.
I can relate to a lot of stuff that he says. And I've known Trump since he was on TV.
A day later, Trump has left the city and people are casting early votes in the midterms. Historically, voter turnout is lower for midterms than presidential elections. And for those under 30, it's even lower. But this year could be different. A poll released by Harvard University surveyed 2,000 young people and found that 40% of them said they will definitely vote. 2 out of 3 of them want the Democrats to control Congress, and Trump's approval rating for those under the age of 30 is 26%. More than half of those surveyed support universal health care and free college tuition. The Republicans are against these policies. So if young people do vote in large numbers, the Democrats will benefit. Older voters tend to support the Republicans. Charlotte is one of the fastest growing cities for young people in the United States. The question is, on the day of the midterm elections, will they come out to vote? Many of them are busy, they're struggling to get ahead, and they feel that neither of the main parties represent them. But Michael Skeen says the midterms are a referendum on the performance of the president, and he will be voting against the Republicans to protect gay rights.
I mean, I was motivated from the beginning. I didn't really take him seriously, but no, it definitely has motivated me because this can actually affect my life and what I'm going through, and his supporters and people that he's put into power. I have been, researching and seeing their stances on my rights that I have and basic human rights, and it's scary.
But whether there's enough anger over Trump and his policies to bring large numbers of young Democrats out on election day is unclear. If they don't show, this side will celebrate another 2 years of a Republican-controlled Congress. Nicole Johnston, TRT World, Charlotte, North Carolina.
So it's all about showing up and casting a vote. But what are the issues that young people really care about? We asked some New Yorkers to tell us what's driving them when they reach the ballot box this week.
One of the most important issues for me is climate change.
Access to jobs that pay a fair wage, I think is extremely important. The access to affordable housing.
Healthcare and how that's hard for people who don't have like a general high income to get, and how that's out of reach for people, and that should be a basic human right.
Extensive immigration reform to make it easier for people to migrate into the country, gun control, and expanding healthcare coverage are the most important issues this election.
Fortunately, I have access to, birth control and healthcare that I need, but a lot of women don't have that, so I think it's important for everyone to be able to access the care that they need or want for themselves and have not only the right to do so, but the access to do so.
Free speech, and then the treating political opponents as opponents rather than enemies.
So we've heard from some young people about what's important to them, but what about the politicians and how they communicate to young voters? We caught up with John Hudak from the Brookings Institute in Washington, D.C. to talk about how effective political campaigns are at reaching out. So, John, when you look at the issue of voter turnout here in the United States, it's notoriously low. That number, when you factor in the youth vote, is even lower than the average. How's this all going to play out in the midterm elections?
Well, a midterm election is really a turnout game for either party, and a party that is able to turn out its base, its core voters, is the one that usually does better. Now, young voters tend to vote Democratic, and so the more young people who come out to vote, the more people of color, the more women who come out to vote, the better of an election day it is for Democrats. If those numbers are held down, Republicans tend to do quite a bit better.
When you look at a grassroots level, there is an extremely high level of political engagement. So I'm having difficulty in understanding why that doesn't sort of translate into voter turnout at the ballot box.
It's an interesting point. There is definitely among young people a civic mindedness, a care about certain issues that touch them deeply, whether it's student loan debt or violence in schools. But political campaigns and political parties have a tough time translating that messaging into campaign mode. That is, campaigns do a really lousy job reaching out to younger voters, whether it's not talking about the issues that they care about, whether it's not speaking to them on the platforms that they use most often. The candidates who are able to do it do well, at least among Democrats. But not every campaign does that, and the parties just haven't caught up to what is a changing demographic group that needs to be reached out to in different ways.
We saw earlier in the show in Nicole Johnston's news piece that there are a lot of young voters out there that feel that neither the Republican Party or the Democratic Party fully represent them. So is it fair to say that both parties are sort of behind the curve here?
That's not really the case, I would say. There is a lot in both parties for young people to like. The parties do speak to a variety of issues that either young people care about or, frankly, young people despise. And so it's a matter of connecting in the right ways. That said, if a young voter is looking for the perfect candidate before they're going to vote, they're never going to vote in an American election. And frankly, they're not going to vote in any election around the world because you never find that perfect candidate. And so I think it's a two-way street. Campaigns need to do a better job speaking to the real issues that matter to young voters, but young people have to have a much more realistic view of how campaigns and elections work. The only way you're going to vote for the person you agree with 100% is if you run yourself. That's not going to happen that often, so you have to do with whatever's best.
What's interesting to me is that the young people of this country have to live with the policies and the laws that are passed by lawmakers the longest. So it just makes sense for them to go out and actually participate in the most basic of their democratic rights.
I think it's a vicious cycle. You have elected officials who say, young voters don't turn out, so we don't have to appeal to them. And then you have young people who say, well, I'm not going to turn out because no one's appealing to me. And one of those sides has to give. Either young people have to start voting in higher numbers despite the fact that they are not messaged to, or the parties have to transition that messaging and say, you know what, we're going to sink money in on the youth vote, hoping that the youth vote actually turns out. And if it doesn't, let's play the long game on this. let's keep this messaging up because eventually they're going to give in, they're going to vote. The candidates who do that well end up being very successful. The ones who don't, and it's most candidates, don't get that youth vote.
John, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.
The issue of gun control has been talked about a lot this year. Mass shootings at several schools in the U.S., including Parkland in Florida, in which 17 people were killed, shocked the world. It's led to a widespread call for tighter gun laws and galvanized many young people to call for action from the government. But 9 months after Parkland, the movement doesn't seem to be resonating with voters, as Steve Mort reports from Florida.
These signs outside this polling station tell a tale. Floridians face a dizzying array of choices in the midterms. But one thing not on the ballot, gun control.
What issues do you care about?
University student Salome Garcia says despite that, it should be an important part of this election, especially after 17 people were shot dead at a school in Parkland in February.
What we want more than ever is to be able to go to school, go to our classes, and not have to fear for our safety. So we need to elect representatives that are going to be strict on gun control. Hey guys, remember to vote.
Garcia's going door to door, cajoling young Floridians to vote.
Especially after Parkland, we are seeing young adults and high schoolers really be the leaders in this movement.
Garcia believes it's not only those of voting age who can make a difference in this election. Hope Guzzle is 17. She became politically active after Parkland. Outside a polling station, she's urging those who can vote to back candidates who support stricter gun laws.
My thought was, oh my God, that could be me, that could be my friend, that could be my brother. That's so terrifying. I need to do something.
In March, Guzzle joined hundreds of thousands of others in the March for Our Lives demonstration in Washington, D.C. that was led by Parkland shooting survivors. During that, Florida lawmakers passed an act raising the age to buy a gun and allowing people with mental illness to be prevented from owning guns for up to a year.
When I saw that I could really make a difference with that, I knew that I had to do more.
Gun control advocates say turnout by young people could be key in pushing forward changes to America's gun laws. But turnout by young people has traditionally been low, and it's an open question as to whether that will change this time.
Some states report early voting by young adults could hit record high levels, but not everyone is convinced it will.
They're worried about school, they're worried about their job, they're worried about their boyfriend or their girlfriend, and so politics often seems far removed, and thus a lot of times younger people just don't really turn out.
Also worrying for gun control campaigners, research shows only 3% of young people now identify it as their top concern.
Oh, there we go.
But for Salome Garcia and Hope Guzzle, gun control remains their priority. Despite skepticism that young people will go to the polls in large numbers come election day, they remain hopeful that candidates supporting their vision will win. And both say they'll continue to try to get out the vote until polls close on Tuesday. Steve Moore, TRT World, Tampa, Florida.
Gun control is an issue high on the list for Curtis Sumter. He's a comedian here in New York and spends most evenings getting on stage and making people laugh. But as a young voter, Curtis has plenty to say about why people like him should go to the polls. Let's hear from Curtis on this week's No Laughing Matter. Curtis, No Laughing Matter, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
For the entire show, we've been trying to dissect, understand how to get the young vote or the young people out to vote. How do you do that?
I think you got to give them issues that they actually care about. Like for me personally, I didn't start voting really until one day I got a letter in the mail that said I owed the government 10 grand in taxes. And then I started voting. You know, all of a sudden my state senator became very important, you know, and so you got to give people issues they care about, you know. I think with the youth, they have a lot of issues to care about now. But with all these school shootings, that affects them, you know. That affects them dearly. I mean, think about how many good close friends you had when you were like 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Everybody's your friend. You're very close to a lot of people. And if they got hurt, that would affect you. I think climate change. I mean, climate change affects them, you know. I think our generation is probably the last generation that ever is going to look at beachfront property like as a positive, you know, like we're gonna be, you know, it's gonna be like they're gonna move all the ghettos to the beach, you know, like don't go down there. That's where those bad people live.
You mentioned Parkland. What's interesting, I was reading a really interesting case study that after those tragic shooting, you saw a lot of young people get engaged politically, and they were sort of able to sort of spearhead the Florida legislature to make some changes in the gun laws, increase the minimum age to buy assault rifles, the waiting time. So what we're seeing is that, you know, if young people are engaged, they're able to make influence change.
Sure. And I think that once you kind of get a taste of that sort of thing, it's very hard to dissipate, right? Like, African Americans in the 1960s and 1968, we started that. Now we have the highest voting rate outside of any, per capita of, I think, pretty much any group. You know, we outperform in voting, but that's because a process was put in place that we really cared about, that showed us how important voting was. We actually saw real results.
What's one measure you can make voting, people head to the polls? You make voting mandatory like you have in other countries?
There's a reason why they made it a right and not a law. You know, I think our founding fathers were pretty smart that way. They were like, listen, if you want to vote, go vote, you know, but you're going to have to make an effort. Look, democracy is powerful, but it's messy. And I think there should be some level of sacrifice. I think, you know, everybody's like, give people a day off and give them a free sandwich at Subway. Like, you know, I'm like, well, you know, maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you should have to, like, take a little time out of your day. Like, think about what our founding fathers did to get the vote. Like, they had a war. Like, you know, I'm sure right after the Civil War, everyone voted. They're like, I earned this. Like, I lost a leg. Like, I'm gonna get my cane and hobble over. Like, nobody, everybody voted after that. And so I think you have to put some sacrifice into it. And if you put sacrifice into it, then, you know, then you deserve to do it.
Curtis?
Yep.
Thanks for joining us here on No Laughing Matter.
That's it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's talk more about some of these issues and how they're being seen from the right here in America. With me is Benjamin Shanley. He's a member of the Republican Party of Nassau County. Ben, good to have you on set. It's said that everyone knows that the Republican Party is sort of up against the wall in terms of a demographic perspective. As a young Republican, what appeals to you?
Well, there are plenty of things that appeal to me. Smaller government, less spending, government hands-off kind of approach. You know, I want them to stay away from our guns. They can stay away from the marijuana, all that. You know, I'm not personally a fan of that, but yeah.
Okay. But as a young Republican, do you subscribe more to sort of conservative values, or are you more of a Trump supporter?
I would call myself more of a conservative, though I do really appreciate Trump. I like the different approach that he takes towards government. I really enjoy how he's not, you know, a politician so much as a businessman, you know, running things his way instead.
Okay. Now, one thing that Republicans are very staunchly supportive of are no sort of easing of gun laws. President Trump has actually come out and sort of ramped up the rhetoric in recent months, saying, especially after the Parkland shooting, we saw that he says perhaps maybe we should be sort of arming teachers. Is that something that you subscribe to?
I don't think that we should necessarily be arming teachers so much as have armed security within schools, you know, armed security guards. I don't think arming a teacher is the way to go. I feel like that's a bit of an extreme case. You know, people go to be, you know, they go to school to be a teacher. You know, I don't think they're necessarily trying to subscribe to culture where they have to, you know, walk around armed all the time to protect the kids that they work for.
Another divisive issue coming into these midterm elections is the whole immigration issue. And the Republicans have sort of made that, they're sort of campaigning on that platform. Do you support a very harsh line in terms of immigration? I mean, you grew up, you're a young Republican, you grew up in a multicultural America. That's something that this country prides itself in. Is that something that you want to go forward with?
Oh yeah, 100%. You know, I think that, you know, we have a long line of history where, you know, multicultural diversity and all that. I think the problem with immigration right now is that we also have to realize that we're not only a country of diversity, but we're also a country of laws. And we need to keep that in mind. You know, I have no problem with people immigrating to the United States. In fact, I welcome it. I think the problem more lies where it becomes illegal and people come into the country illegally. I feel like they
I feel like that.
What about the border? Now we're seeing that President Trump has sort of issued an executive order saying that they want more troops to be stationed. If that sort of wants to build a wall, there are going to be tens of thousands of troops there, more so than in Syria and in Iraq. I mean, is this the message that needs to be sort of debated right now?
Well, I think that the message that needs to be debated right now is, whether or not we're going to let these people into our country, without being vetted, without, any, we have no idea who any of those people are. I think the way that they should approach that is they should all go to embassies and ask for entrance into the country legally, as opposed to just coming into the country. We have no idea who any of them are. I think that.
Ben, thanks for coming on set and actually giving us all that from this perspective.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, well, we just heard from a young Republican. Let's get the perspective now from a group of young people who are about to vote for the very first time. Courtney Keeley has been to Williamstown in Western Massachusetts to talk to some teenagers who are part of a social media movement called Soon We Vote.
I'm Courtney Keeley with TRT World here in Western Massachusetts at the Buxton School, talking with teachers and students and how they're going to get out and vote. Do you have a memory of saying, this isn't fair, I want to vote?
Definitely in the past year, as someone who is going to be 18 soon, it's something that I've been thinking more about in like logistic ways as far as registering and getting ballots and that sort of stuff.
And did this group help you get the logistics done while you were at
definitely.
school?
Definitely also having a community here that talks about it and like invigorates the idea that voting's important.
I'm skeptical of the, of whether or not my voice will be heard or whether or not my vote will, matter, I guess. But it's like what we can do, so why not?
I think part of what's hard is feeling like my voice might be heard, but then I won't be included in the discussion about it, I guess, like feeling like that's what the young people think. What do you guys think about that?
I think there needs to be more actions and more organizing and more like kind of boots on the ground. And in addition to that, like changing policies.
So you think this is an act, but then there's the actual activism?
Yeah. I think that like there's a difference between trying to change policies and like change the way that the government is working right now, and also trying to change the government.
Do you feel like you can cut through the partisan noise?
Maybe.
You're trying.
I mean, it's a big question.
No, I know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a pretty overwhelming dialogue or lack of dialogue that's happening in the U.S. right now.
Yeah.
And you guys are just finding your voice. You're voting for the first time, right?
Yeah. Right now, especially with the internet being so involved, it's like you're getting a constant onslaught of opinions, and like it's hard to figure out what you believe in. And I think conversation one-on-one, the way it's encouraged here, is how I have been able to figure things out.
Do you feel like the combination of getting to vote this year and also being able to use social media as a way to engage in politics as a positive thing mainly?
We're really lucky to, have the internet and social media as a resource to just like learn about our candidates and like learn about, what we're going to be voting on. But yeah, I do see the danger of it. I definitely see how social media is creating a very partisan, world right now. It's definitely fostering that a lot.
Are you able to joke around about it and not offend each other?
Well, no.
Do you feel like you can have serious conversations with people your own age, whether within the school community or outside the school community, when you have very clear differences of opinion?
I think sometimes it's hard to do that, but when people are really invested in like learning about other people's opinions, then it does work out.
As teachers, what do you hear a lot with students who are, pretty unfiltered and honest?
It's really neat as a teacher to see the rhetoric change in a way that I feel like I'm pushing towards. So to walk into a classroom and have students say things on their own unprompted in a discussion that like I would have wanted to foster is really, really incredible. Something that happened in 2016 is that all of a sudden there is a realization, and that's a lot come from younger people and come from teens, that that was really wrong and really, really hasn't been working.
What would be the opposite of your opinion of somebody who had like your choices? Would it be Like somebody at a Trump rally?
Probably.
Or maybe not necessarily.
For me, I would say like a pretty stark Trump supporter who like isn't interested in learning about other people and other opinions. And like I think that the most valuable people are the people who had one stance and then learned about someone else's experience and then switched.
The midterm elections are an opportunity for young people in this country to exercise their say, and the outcome could directly affect them. The millennials are a large group that could potentially swing this election. So both sides of the political spectrum will want to win them over. But the question is, will they succeed? Plenty more to talk about, so we can keep the conversation going on Facebook and on Twitter. So please do send us your questions and comments to @TRTWorld. Until next time, that's it from our team here in New York. I'm Alican Ayanlar, here on The Square.